It is interesting to do such a presentation, especially during this lockdown phase where we are hardly able to work, or most of us are doing some minimal kind of work. Okay. Today I'm going to speak about. Just give me 1 minute. Is my screen seen to you all?
Yes, sir. We can see the presentation, sir.
Okay. Okay, fine. Okay, today I'm going to speak about how to conduct a systematic review. I mean, we all do clinical trials, we do case control studies, observational studies. Maybe some of us also do randomized control trials. But this is an era. Some universities across the country have asked their residents or the PG students to conduct a systematic review instead of doing a library dissertation. So this presentation would help the PGs, the research scholars, or the PhD students who intend to conduct a systematic review. The objectives of this presentation will be to understand the evidence-based practice, differentiate between good and poor evidence, understand what exactly is a systematic review, what are the different steps in making of a systematic review, and in the end, if you are well charged up by the end of this lecture, maybe you can even perform a systematic review. What is evidence? Evidence is what is available in the literature. What is seen in the literature is all evidence. Now, there is something called as good evidence and bad evidence as well. So, always go for authentic literature. Authentic literature. What I mean by authentic literature is those which reviewed journals. So, if you have something which is published in a non-peer reviewed journal, maybe that will be considered as not a good evidence, and that may not be used for your clinical practice, nor for your systematic review, or nor for your even gaining of knowledge. And what is evidence-based dentistry? To use this evidence into clinical practice is nothing but evidence-based dentistry. Why do we need evidence-based dentistry? This will be an overview of the current presentation. What is a systematic review and the current initiatives in a systematic review? Now, somebody asked me, why do we do evidence? Why is there a need for evidence-based dentistry? It's mainly because you provide optimal care to the patients. If tomorrow somebody tells me that I have had a good experience with this particular drug for this particular lesion, how do I know that it's not just an anecdotal experience and it's a proper evidence? So unless a trial is conducted for that particular drug and published in a peer-reviewed journal, we can't consider it as a good evidence. So that is why I always insist on authentic journals. What forms this evidence is literature in these authentic journals. Now, this is very important because I see that most of the PG students, they just come to you with references from some journals which are not even peer-reviewed. So first thing I ask my PG student is, which journal is this? When is it? When is this article published? Because if it's an age-old article, maybe published in say somewhere around 1970 or 1980s, it just you have good evidence in terms of authentic journals and in terms of contemporariness of that reference. Apart from that, poor evidence is always considered as case reports, case series, review articles, narrative review, not systematic review. And that is why if you see, you don't get good citations for case reports and case series. In fact, most of the good journals don't even these days consider case reports, unless you are really adding some new knowledge to it, or a very rare case report is being published. And what is a good evidence? A case control studies, a randomized control trial, or a systematic review may be considered as a good evidence. Now, this is a picture of evidence-based hierarchy. If you see here at the base of this pyramid is ideas, opinions, editorials, anecdotal. Now, this will just not form good evidence. Just higher up is case series, and case reports. And in these two blocks, you will hardly find any reference to these kind of an articles. Apart from this, cross-sectional studies, case control studies, cohort studies, randomized control trial, and right at the top is systematic reviews and meta-analysis. And that is why I always insist that do a systematic review so that you directly start from. I mean, of course, you must have, some of you must have done all these kind of studies. So it's at a higher level of evidence, and that is residents should be able to access good literature. We just talk about.
I would request all the participants who have joined late to kindly mute their microphones and also the video if possible. Okay, please carry on, sir. Please, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, basically, I am from oral medicine radiology branch, so that is why my examples will be all related to oral medicine and radiology. Some of them will be related to surgery. Please excuse me for this because that has been my experience. So, but of course, you can extrapolate this experience to your own field also. It's not difficult. So, talking about oral radiology literature, this was not considered too high in evidence almost till last decade. And that's because in radiology, it's difficult to do a randomized control trial. Why is it difficult to do a randomized control trial in radiology? It's because you can't conduct an intervention. There is no scope for intervention at this moment in oral radiology. And that is why it was not considered. Of course, there have been interventional studies right now. And how, I'll just give you an example. I know of a study which was done on disinfected tube, and what was the experience of the patient and the surgeon on disinfections. And the surgeons were given in one group, the surgeons were given OPG, and in the other group, the surgeons were given CBCT to evaluate the impacted tooth and conduct their surgery. And that is, this radiographic evidence may be considered as a intervention. So there have been scope for oral radiology randomized control trial as well. Only for academic purpose, I will, of course, I will explain to you in detail about what exactly and how you are going to conduct a systematic review. Now, fortunately, I have been a part of 3 systematic reviews, and I'm really indebted to some of my mentors, especially this guy, Dr. Mel Muparapu, who is popularly known as Murli in India. He's from University of Pennsylvania. I remember talking to him about this particular article, and he said that you should do a system. In fact, we were only publishing this 72 additional cases. And he wrote back to me saying that, no, you should do a systematic review along with this. And I told him that I don't have any experience. He just pushed me. He said, you will be able to do it. You go ahead and you do it. And he said that I will be with you. I'll guide you in this, but you do it. And that is how I actually put my first feet into it. And yes, it finally was published in OOO in 2013. And see the number of citations that it has got, 32 till date. And I think this was checked maybe last week. So, and then we went on, and then the scope opened up. Then we did a management related outcomes and radiographic findings of idiopathic condylar resorption. And this was also published in the International Journal of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery. This was, I think, in 2015. Yeah. And the number, again, see the number of citations, 26 citations for this. The last systematic review which was published by my team was in the British Journal of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery. This was about recurrence rate of odontogenic myxoma and different treatments, after different treatments. And it was in December 2019, late December 2019. So as good as this year itself, and it already has 2 citations. There are 3 more systematic reviews we are doing at this moment. One is on Coram's disease. The other one is on survival analysis of ameloblastenic carcinoma. And the other one is on treatment-related outcomes of anterior disc derangement. Now, what is a narrative review? Narrative review and how it is different from systematic review. Narrative review is what we usually do in our library dissertation. We just compile everything. You're given a topic or you select a topic, and then you just compile whatever is available on that topic and put it in your library dissertation. Maybe you group it in some particular way and then just spool it in your library dissertation. And that is why, if the same topic is considered for systematic review, it would be much better. In fact, Maharashtra University of Health Sciences has now insisted that all library dissertations be systematic reviews, either a proper systematic review or at least an exercise in a systematic review. What is a narrative review? A narrative review doesn't have any question. Some of you who must have done a library dissertation know that there is no question to be answered for a narrative review. It, it's just conducted without any question to be answered. Whereas a systematic review, you are supposed to formulate a research
परीक्षा
question.
द्यावी हे विद्यार्थ्यांच्या शिकण्यासाठी हितासाठी केले. तथापि
No,
याबाबत नकारात्मक दृष्टीने प्रसिद्धी म्हणजे निगेटिव्हली प्रसिद्ध झालं.
please mute yourself.
कॅन्सल केले आणि परीक्षा घेण्यासाठी आवश्यक ती कार्यवाही करण्यात येतात. उत्तर माहितीसाठी फॉर इन्फॉर्मेशन. अजिबात लिहायला वेळ नव्हता. 2 ओळी लिहिला की कोणतरी यायचं. आणि ते पण करून टाका. लेटर आज
Okay. I think we need to continue with this. Otherwise, we will be running short of time. There are,
ते बोलवतो.
you just conduct a library dissertation by not any particular search method. No particular search engine is used. You don't have search terminologies to do these searches. Whereas an explicit search, which is reproducible, which should be ideally reproducible, is a part of a systematic review. Some journals even check if you have given a search strategy that is there in your manuscript. Some journals put that in the PubMed or in the search engine that you have stated, and see if the same results can be reproduced. It's very important that you use a proper search engine, a proper search strategy. There is no inclusion exclusion criteria, no selection criteria is used in a narrative review, whereas there is an explicit inclusion exclusion criteria to be stated before you embark on a systematic review. Some of the students do combine the studies based on clinical findings, radiographic findings, treatment related findings, but not all of. I get students who come and ask me, how do we combine all this? And some people just put it like year wise, beginning from the first case to the last case. So it's very haphazard. So that is why preferable to do a systematic review than a narrative review. Topics on which systematic reviews have been done for the last 1 year. We just checked all the systematic reviews done for the last 1 year in oral radiology, and this is what we found. So, and one interesting thing is there's some systematic review also published on artificial intelligence applications, which is really interesting. Okay, suppose you get a case like this. This was one of our case in which you see multilocular lesion, minimal expansion, maybe some expansion here in the anterior region, and there was some root resorptions in some areas, anterior, lower anteriors, in this premolar region there is some root resorption. So we were so if you get this kind of a case, so what do? I mean, you go through the literature, you go to your textbook and find out what could be the differential diagnosis. Now in this case, the differential diagnosis was either KOT, dentigerous cyst, or an ameloblastoma. Okay, but then why root resorption? So then in the systematic review that we did on KOT, we found that root resorption was noted and not a dominant feature of all the groups. That means it was not found in any of the groups, any of the global groups that we had defined, but significantly higher in the East Asian group. So that means that in East Asian groups, root resorption is quite high in KOT. However, India doesn't really fall into this East Asian group. So we need to do more studies to find out how much of our KOTs have root resorption. So a systematic review also opens up different areas to conduct research. And what is the benefit of a systematic review? It's a ready reckoner for busy clinicians it aids in clinical diagnosis. It also aids in diagnosis for management decisions. And as I said, it also identifies new areas for primary research. Some online resources that are available for if you want to start a systematic review. Before that, you go through all these resources that are available. One is Cochrane Library, the other is this is Prospero website, CRD. Then you have Institute of Medicine, and closer home, Vellore CMC conducts a good course on systematic review. It conducts a regular training program for systematic review. So if you want, you can go through all this and then start a systematic review. However, let me tell you clearly that it is not mandatory that you need to have a training beforehand. It's good to have a training beforehand, because frankly, I never had any training, and still we could manage 3 systematic reviews till date, and we have 3 more in pipeline. This is what medical literature says, that there are around 75 trials and 11 systematic reviews published a day. So that's the amount of literature coming up in medicine. Of course, closer home, dentistry. Of course, as I said, I will be giving examples of only oral medicine, radiology, or maybe oral surgery. So to keep up with 4 leading oral radiology journals, that is OOO, DMFR, ISD, and oral radiology coming up from Japan, one has to read 205 articles per year. To keep up with 2 leading oral medicine journals, one has to read at least 186 articles per year to just keep you abreast of all the different literature, different articles being published in these journals. Now, you may argue, or I don't need to read all the 186 articles. I will only read those of your interest, those of my own interest. Absolutely right. You don't need to read everything. Whatever interests you, you need to read. But just imagine even half of it. Are we really reading so much in a year? Even half or 1/3 of it, I really doubt. I personally, I don't myself read so much. So I don't know. The biomedical research, biomedical literature is expanding at a compound rate of 6 to 7% per year. So see the amount of literature coming out. And during your professional career, the biomedical literature may increase tenfold. And mind you, these 2 statements have been published in 1985. So this definitely this is, it's much more than that now. Okay, so how to conduct a systematic review? You first need to identify a clear, answerable question. You need to have a reproducible search strategy. What are you going to search? Of course, all these individual 8 points we can have separate lectures on all individual of them, and that's how a training program is conducted. Assessment of literature quality, summary of evidence, statistical analysis, sometimes in systematic review, almost always in meta-analysis. After you get all this, how are you going to interpret the data? You also need to know how to interpret this data. What conclusions you are going to draw? What recommendations are you going to give to future workers on that topic? And finally, to get it published. So these are the different steps of a systematic review. Formulate a research question, determine the study eligibility criteria, systematically search for all eligible studies, systematically extract all the relevant data. It is very important to extract the relevant data, and that too has to be done by 2 different workers, specialists in that particular field. Minimum 2. There are people who use more than 2 also to extract data, to identify the data, and if there is a difference between the 2, you need to also appoint a third senior person who, if there is a dispute between the 2, you go to the third person and then solve the dispute. And this is very important when you conduct a systematic review. You also evaluate the quality of risk of bias for every study. And then finally summarize the study, who said what, and what are your results, and what is the quality of the study. Now, how to select a research question? Now, I'll give you a small tip here. Whenever you see that there is some controversy about some particular topic in the literature, there you identify that this topic has to probably needs systematic review. At the same time, also be aware that there should be enough literature on that topic. If there is not enough literature, maybe only 2 or 3 articles published about it, then it doesn't make sense to only compile 2 or 3 articles. So you should have enough literature available to answer that question. So controversy around a particular topic and enough literature about it. Like say, I'll give you an example of lichen planus being malignant or not malignant. It's an age-old controversy, and as far as I know, not much systematic review work has been done on this topic. So this can be something, a controversial topic, a lot of literature. So this can be identified as a topic. Okay, before embarking on a systematic review, there is something called as a scoping review. You need to do a scoping review is what? You need to identify that earlier systematic reviews has been done on this topic or not. Because if an earlier systematic review has been done, and that too very lately, it will be a frustrating experience for you to find it out at the end of your systematic review that something has already been done. Review, search Cochrane for the topic that you want to conduct a systematic review on. Search Medline using your topic and in capitals and systematic.tw, and then see if there's any systematic review coming up. Search Google and Google Scholar. Now I put Google and Google Scholar, but though they are all gray literature, because some people, some journals insist that you include gray literature in your search strategy also. So, and if you do that, I mean, it's a good thing to have gray literature also, because gray literature may give you a different angle on the same topic. Search Scopus. And you also need to go to this TRIP database and find out if there's a systematic review published on your topic. It's a good database to go through, TRIP database. You can also try put a PubMed reminder to find out if a systematic review has been done on this one. And after all this is done, you need to have a protocol. You need to have a proper protocol ready. And I always insist on a protocol, because then you don't deviate on what you want to do, or you don't lose your focus, or then you, once you start, then you don't ask, okay, what next I'm supposed to do, what next I'm supposed to do. If you have a protocol ready with you, you just follow those protocols. And this protocol ideally has to be registered before starting a systematic review with an organization called as Prospero, which is based in UK. Either this, or it can also be published as a protocol in a journal called Systematic Review. But Prospero is popular. This is the site of the Prospero website. This is how it looks. Prospero offers free registration, free public access to all kind of systematic, to register all kind of systematic review health, related to health, from all over the world. So there is nothing to worry that it only registers medical systematic reviews and not dental. It does register all topics across the world and anything on the topic of health. Ideally, the registration of Prospero should take place before you start formal screening. But then, as generally I tell my PG students, you can start the review, come up to at least data extraction. Once you finish the data extraction, then go back and do Prospero registration, because Prospero has a catch that once you submit a protocol, and then if you want to deviate from the protocol, you need to apply again. Not application as a whole, but as a part of whatever changes you are making, you need to inform them, and they will go through it again, and then if it's eligible, then they will approve. So to avoid this step, generally I tell my PG students to do everything up to the point of data extraction and then register. But again, there is a catch here. Why? Because recently Prospero has been very busy, and they just take long time to register your protocol. Like say, they almost took 6 months to register our last protocol. That too, we were lucky, thanks to COVID. They just processed all other systematic reviews and focused only on COVID. So we had a fast track registration. So it's very important that you register well before in time. Like if you are in the first year of your PG, search a topic, get it approved from your guide, and go for registration of Prospero. Now, if you see, this is a map of number of visits into Prospero. Like if you see, the North American, Australian continent has maximum number of visits, followed by China as well as some countries in the South America. India and South Africa comes next. So, and some parts of Europe as well. So the number of visits data. So of course, now you see here that the number of registrations when it started in 2011 was zero. And then it's slowly increased. In 2013, the number of registrations increased to say 1,800. However, this data is only limited to 2013. So we found out that in the last 2 years, that is 2018 and 19, over 30,000 new submissions were made from 118 different countries. So the point I want to make is start early. Start early for your registration. Writing a systematic review protocol is again another important step, because if you make mistakes in this protocol, you may then get communications from Prospero to revise it, and this will take a lot of time. So state the question clearly, state the question that you want to address, state the area, the condition or the domain that is being studied. That is, you give a background of what you want to. And how do you write an introduction? Introduction is basically what you know on the topic, what you don't know on the topic, and how are you going to bridge that gap? How are you going to cover it up, what you don't know on the topic? So this is how you basically write the introduction. Then you identify what are your participants, who are your participants. I mean, what populations are you going to study? Are you going to study only males, only females, only certain age groups, only children, only adult? So that population needs to be identified. Have proper inclusion exclusion criteria and exposure. So now generally in radiology we don't do intervention, we don't do much of interventional studies, but then if at all you have a topic in which there is no intervention available, then you consider exposure as a part of intervention. Also, you include types of studies to be included. Now, this statement here actually has been our experience, and then we found that there is a reference to what we have experienced. It says that when you read a paper, I'll just explain you what it says. When you read a paper, an article, you feel that you have identified everything and you have understood what the author is trying to tell. But what happens when you include this particular article in a systematic review to identify or to extract the data, then you feel that there are a lot of ambiguities, there are a lot of obscurities, and there are a lot of gaps in that data, which you find it difficult to extract data from such articles. So grossly reading and reading it to extract data are two different things. So, and then of course there are we just found that there are varying terminologies being used in the literature, and this was particularly in our odontogenic myxoma systematic review. If you read this yellow highlight, various terms as excision. Now see the kind of terminologies that have been used. Excision curettage. Now what is excision curettage? We fail to understand that. And conservative excision. Now what do you mean by conservative excision? We thought that excision itself is a conservative procedure. Now, this is kind of terminologies which have been used in the literature, and then we finally said that we had to finally consider both excision, all these three: excision, curettage, and conservative excision as conservative treatment, because our comparator group was conservative and radical treatment. So you may experience something like that, and when you have this kind of an experience, always put it on paper so that it looks that you have done a thorough work. The most important part of the systematic review, you need to appropriately construct the question. That is, you need to have a narrow question. Don't make it too broad. Because a broad question, you will lose focus. You don't know what to remove from the data and what exactly to put it in your paper. Again, to give you an insight of my experience, I generally tell my students, or when I do it myself, I extract as much as data possible. though your question is narrow, you extract as much as data as possible. You focus only on your question, but the rest of the data may be sometime later be used for another systematic. You at that point you don't want to go back to the literature and again extract data. So that is why generally I keep my question narrow, which is ideal. At the same time, you extract maximum data. Of course, this is my style of working. You may all have develop your own style of working. You need to have a definition of an outcome and the population that we have already spoken about. So, giving you the example of the research questions that we had in our 3 systematic reviews that we did. The first one was to compare demographic and radiographic findings. Sorry, not this. The article also attempts to determine the prevalence of KOT and OOC in the Western Indian population. Sorry. The aim of this present systematic review was to critically appraise clinical and radiographic findings of KOT from available data. So our focus was clear only on clinical and radiographic findings. We were not interested in what is the recurrence rate or what is the treatment for this KOT. So that is how you identify a narrow question. What did we do for idiopathic condylar resorption? To examine the best practices for imaging, here also we did imaging, and to appraise the success of surgical and non-surgical therapy. We included both surgical and pharmacotherapy to compare the success rates. And of course, we included randomized control trials and case series that assess this diagnostic imaging and management for idiopathic condylar resorption. What was our research question for odontogenic myxoma? The rationale for this review was therefore to apprise critically the available published evidence about recurrence rate. Here it was clear that we wanted to do it on recurrence rate of odontogenic myxoma and its management. So focus on a narrow question. Now you need to have a good eligibility criteria, inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. Inclusion like are you going to do it only on adults or children? What are you going to exclude? Or generally always we exclude in vitro studies, experimental studies, animal models, because in fact most of our literature don't have these kind of studies as well. And simulated studies are not really well looked upon by most journals. So some selection criteria here, it's a huge list. I may not go into details of all that. KOT had these many inclusion criteria and so much of exclusion criteria. One thing I would like to stress that we stated that only those KOTs which were histopathologically diagnosed as KOT would be considered as will be included in the systematic. So others which are just clinically diagnosed or radiographically diagnosed will not be considered. Some of the exclusion criteria, let's go through some of them. That case series, I think we had included case series here. But again, review articles were excluded from this systematic review. And for odontogenic myxoma, our exclusion criteria were papers for soft tissue odontogenic. Soft tissue to odontogenic myxoma was excluded. Any research done on specific groups, such as particular age group or particular gender, was excluded. Restricted to any particular site or any particular job was also excluded. So this is how you need to formulate your inclusion exclusion criteria. We included all the studies under odontogenic myxoma like case control studies, controlled clinical trials, structured reviews, or meta-analysis. Going on to idiopathic condylar resorption, we had almost a similar kind of inclusion exclusion criteria here, but it is stated here explicitly. We will not go into details of it. Okay, now you need to have search strategies. Now always have search terminologies which are mesh terminologies. You can always have search terminologies without mesh terminologies also, because that will then broaden your search strategy. That will then broaden your search. And always have multiple search engines like Embase, Medline, Web of Science, Ovid. You need to have multiple search engines available, because that is one of the requirement. I mean, you can't have just one search engine, PubMed may I search, and that is all I'm going to include. No, that's not how it is done. So search strategies should include mesh terminologies, include multiple database. You need to have 2 reviewers minimum 2 reviewers minimum to identify the articles, 2 reviewers minimum for data extraction. And the 2 reviewers may remain the same for both the steps. You don't need to have 2 separate reviewers for that. So, and you need to also have a process for agreement. As I told you, that there is a dispute between these 2 reviewers, then you go ahead and have a third senior reviewer who can solve this dispute. Now, these were the different search strategies, search engines that we had used here, as well as the search strategy. Of course, one of the in KOT we had used maximum number of search engines. Like if you see here, there are so many search engines. This 3-4 lines will tell you the number of search engines we had used. And if you see one of our latest systematic reviews, we had then reduced down focus to only some search engines. But the criteria is that you should have at least 2 or more search engines to be included in your search strategies. And
Sir, just a reminder, sir, sorry for interruption.
Yeah.
Just a reminder to all the participants that as per the norms of this website, we will be logging off after 5 minutes, but you can resume joining it, logging in the same link. So in case the presentation gets abruptly end in between after 5 minutes, you can re-log in with the same link. So sorry for the inconvenience. Sir, you can continue, sir.
Yeah. So we use different search engines for the point I want to make is use different search engines. Now I'll give you my experience. Generally, what happens, if you go through this odontogenic myxoma article, it's published in British Journal of Surgery, Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery. You see that PubMed gives you maximum maximum articles to be included in the systematic review. Whereas most of the other search engines, in fact, for odontogenic myxoma, they were all 000. None of the other search engines contributed. And that has been an experience. PubMed is a good search engine. But that doesn't mean you only need to search PubMed. You need to include other search engines. You need to do manual search based on the references of the articles that you have identified to be included in the search, in the systematic review. So this is how you conduct your search. You also need to have a data extraction form. You need to have a clear data extraction form before you start your search. And maybe what happens, generally once you start the search, you realize that, oh, I need to include one more point. You may add a few more points here. That is okay. A small change in the protocol is fine, but if you're deviating the protocol, Prosperone may take an opportunity. Or you may have a problem when the systematic review. So I have a proper clear data extraction forms ready, and these were our data extraction forms. The one in the previous slide was for KOT, and that's for the ICR, and this open identify the author. Here, just to give you an example, the number of cases that were identified from different authors, from these different articles, what was the management approach that was used, what was the relapse rate, what was the percentage of relapse, and when you have a relapse rate, you also need to have a follow-up period. So you may have a relapse rate which is too high in a very short period of time, or which is too low for a long period of time. And now the relapse rate too low for a long period of time is always a favorable management strategy, okay, or a favorable management approach. So that is what the states. And a similar approach we had for odontogenic myxoma, because that was also based on recurrence and recurrence rates. Okay. But there are certain problems also associated with data extraction. There may be non-uniform outcomes. Like sometimes data also. There may not be adequate data. Or the data is not really homogeneous. Or there may be a discrepancy in the data. Like I remember in the abstract, a different figure was given, and in the text, the entire manuscript, a different figure was given. It becomes difficult to identify which data to extract in that case. In such a case, what you do is to write to the author and tell him that this is the discrepancy we have found, and can you tell us which data we need to include in our systematic? This is the most correct data. Sometimes there is confusing data. You can't figure out what the author is trying to say. And so sometimes what happens now, you can easily exclude this kind of data. You can easily exclude this kind of articles from your systematic review. And whenever you're excluding some articles from the systematic review, you need to clearly state the reasons. Because what happens sometimes, if there is a doubt on your data, on your systematic review, then the editor may ask for the raw data, or may ask you to state why this particular article has been rejected from or not included in your systematic review. And this happens when some author feels that my article should have been included in the systematic review and it is not there. Then they write to the editor. This sometimes happens. There is sometimes missing data, or there is sometimes, or to prevent future autoimmune disorders. And these hydrolyzed formulas were quite expensive. And some of the mothers who couldn't afford it used to feel guilty that I can't feed my child the hydrolyzed formula. So this systematic review found that there is no link between feeding hydrolyzed formulas to babies, or there is no evidence between feeding hydrolyzed formulas to babies and eczema or allergic reactions or sorry, or different autoimmune disorders. So that is the impact it had. And what it did, it actually changed guidelines for multiple countries all over the world. You can go through this in BMJ and find out. It actually, many countries then changed their guidelines that there is no need to feed hydrolyzed formulas to babies. And this is the kind of impact a systematic review can have. That is why it is a gratifying experience, as well as it's very fulfilling and very satisfying kind of an experience. To sum it all, I would leave you with some do's and don'ts of systematic review. What do? You always ask for advice. If you're not very confident, not very sure, get advice of your guide or other experts in the field. You should have different specialists to extract data. Have another specialist to select the papers, not just yourself. You, as well as someone else, to need to select the papers, extract the data. Formulate a narrow research question. Don't let it look too broad. Identify what language paper are you going to use. Generally, we do only English language search. So, but there are people who include other than English language search as well. But you need to have access to translation, and you just don't need to translate the abstract. You need to translate the entire stuff because of discrepancy in data sometimes between the abstract and the text. Okay. And pilot the search terms and search strategies. So these are the do's. The don'ts. Don't skip any search strategy procedure. What happens that you then exclude some important article, and then what happens if you exclude an important article? That particular author then writes to the journal editor stating that I want to know what reasons have been given for excluding my article. So as far as possible, conduct thorough search for all possible articles, and then you screen it for inclusion. And don't have vague objectives. Vague objective again leads to vague results. You can't make a strong statement out of it. So have a narrow, focused question. A graphical representation of what we were doing earlier. And some of us still do it. A narrative review is what we consider as library dissertation. Uh, Performed as a systematic review and not just a narrative review. And some of these systematic reviews also have a potential to be turned into a meta-analysis. So this is how evolution anyway takes place. Okay. So give it a thought, and definitely all the best to you all who want to conduct a systematic review. Follow the steps and do it. I also acknowledge my department at the Nair Hospital Dental College, as well as all of you for being a patient listener. Anyone who has any questions or any doubts can either put it in the chat or raise your hand, and ask the question.
Yeah. So thank you, sir, for a very elaborate and nice presentation. Now I would request the participants to kindly come up with any queries or questions or suggestions related to the topic. Do we have any questions or queries related to the topic? Anyone coming up with any question?
I have a question.
Yeah, please. Who is there, ma'am?
Go ahead.
Because PubMed is free, and some of us have subscription to our university subscribes to Scopus. Apart from that, what all databases I can access?
Mhm. I think Ovid is also free. Apart from that, Ovid is free, Scopus is free.
So Scopus requires subscription.
Yeah, actually, since I am a reviewer for Triple O, I get it free. Yeah,
Yeah,
Scopus requires subscription.
and I think Cochrane is also free, Central.
Cochrane is free, but you know what happens? You know, most of our dental related topics are not included in, definitely not oral radiology and oral medicine. So we generally get zero search from Cochrane.
So is there a way where we can have an access or contact someone who accesses for that?
See, generally the library or the institution should have subscription to some of these search engines. Individually, it is difficult because these subscriptions are huge. I mean, it's a huge amount to pay. So, or you need to collaborate with somebody who can give you access to the full text, or
Right.
who can give you subscription for that particular search engine. That could be one way out. Yeah.
It's another query is about the statistics part.
Uh-huh.
So suppose we conducted the search as you said. Whom do I contact for the statistics? Because not all statisticians are well versed with meta-analysis and things involved.
Okay. At the outset, let me say that I have not done any meta-analysis. So I am not really an expert in meta-analysis. But I'll tell you one thing. There is a site, meta-analyst. Meta-analyst. I think it is metaanalyst.com. And that is a free statistical website for conducting statistics for meta-analysis. Because statistics for meta-analysis is quite complicated. Those forest plots and funnel plots and
Right,
other
sir.
sets. So it's a little complicated stuff. But my advice to you, would be first begin with a systematic review, and then maybe once you get a hang of it, you can switch over to meta-analysis. In fact, we have done 3, 4, and now we also want to. You need to have a good statistician, and that's something even I have a problem with.
Right, sir.
It's really difficult to find a good statistician. I really appreciate that you raised this topic here.
Thank you so much, sir, for clarifying and the wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Satya. There is one more question coming from Dr. Ranjita Mehta. So, Dr. Ranjita, if you are there, you can ask the question yourself, or should I put the question from my side? Dr. Ranjita Mehta. Okay. So probably she is not able to connect. I will ask the question on her behalf. She has asked that involving more than one viewer will make the systematic review more authentic without bias. It is her query, sir.
Okay. So involving only one systematic review is definitely not done. That is not what even Prisma guidelines, or there is one more guideline, ANSTER guidelines. Prisma is reporting guidelines, and ANSTER is conducting guidelines for systematic review. So none of these guidelines state that you can do it with only one systematic review. Definitely, yes, you need to have minimum 2 reviewers to do the data search. and one to solve the disputes between the two. In fact, I came across one particular systematic review where they stated reviewers identified the articles and 3 reviewers identified or extracted the data. Now, this is strange because why do you need three reviewers? But to answer your question, you need to have minimum 2. Yes, you need to have 2 reviewers.
Okay. So,
Good afternoon, sir. I have a doubt on the same point.
Yeah.
You said minimum 2 reviewers. It
Yeah.
should be they can divide the questions
no.
to the reviewing. Same reviewing has to be done by 2.
Yes, and independently. Not that they sit together and do it. They have to do it independently. Yeah. You
Okay,
can,
so if you have, maybe if the research question is you have 2 questions, so both the questions, all the articles should be reviewed by both of them
Yes.
independently. That's what.
Yes, absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Oh, that's clear, sir. Thank you very much, sir. So wonderful, and it was explained really well, and it looks like SR is simple after listening to your presentation.
It is simple. Don't worry about it. It's simple. You
And
can.
is it a must that we have to undergo a course, or if we do some reading and we can start?
Reading definitely is needed, but to undergo a training process, it's always good to do some training. And I have heard good reviews about CMC Vellore.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Personally, I have not attended any of those. I have done all the systematic reviews without attending any course. But of course, I have had good mentors and I managed it. Yeah.
As mentioned, yes, in the presentation.
It's not mandatory to do the course. Nobody is going to ask you what qualifications you had to do the systematic review.
Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
so do we have any other query?
I can. May I ask a question again?
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Actually, most of these courses are on interventions. They compare 2 interventions. So when, as a radiologist, say I compare between 2 modalities, imaging modalities. So is there any change?
No, in your comparator group, then you write that you had probably compared between conventional imaging modality and the advanced imaging modality. Or you be very clear. You had compared, maybe if you're doing it for KVs or something, you compared between bite ring and you compared between CBC. Oh, that is how you have a comparator group. I hope
Right, sir.
I have made it clear.
Like I was.
Yeah.
I was checking, like comparing between CBCT and other modalities for, say, bone invasion in oral cancer. There are not many studies, and both modalities have to check the same patients.
No. See, you in systematic review, you have a group of studies that you have finally included in your review. Okay, in this
Right.
review, how many have used conventional modality to assess bone invasion, and how many use CBCT to assess bone invasion, and what are their findings of conventional modality findings, and what are the findings of CBCT? That is how you compare. You don't. It should not.
Right.
Every article should have done both.
Right. Thank you again, sir.
Yeah, thanks.
There is one more question coming from Dr. Meenal, that how much time is needed to do a systematic review?
Okay, as I said in my presentation itself, like you need to have at least 1.5 years in hand. Like the first 6 months goes in extracting the data, goes in identifying the data and extracting the data. Whereas the later 1 year goes in compiling everything and putting it in on paper, writing a manuscript, sending it to journals. Because it is not that you send it to one journal and immediately it gets accepted. You need to hop on to different journals and finally it gets published in some journal. So it takes around 1 to 1.5 years easily to leave that much space for doing your work.
Any other question coming up? Okay. So, sir, I think we had a very nice deliberation from you, and probably I think we would require another session from your side to go ahead with this from where you had left. Because now many of us will be trying the things, and there would be definitely questions coming up. One last question from Dr. Amit Agarwal is there, that would any ethical clearance needed from IEC will be needed from IEC?
No. You go through all the systematic reviews that have been done, or you just go through the 3 systematic reviews clear that you are not dealing with patients. You are not dealing with patient-related data. So ethical committee does not have any role in that. You are just dealing with literature. When you deal with patient or patient-related data, ethical committee comes into picture. Otherwise, it doesn't. You don't need an IEC permission.
Okay. So, and one more from Satya. Okay, I think he has requested for your email ID, sir. So, can you please type it in the chat box if possible, sir, your email ID?
Okay. I don't know how to.
Sir, you tell me, sir. I'll
Entire name at yahoo.com. AAUS.
all in running letters, sir.
All in short letters.
Okay, KAU. Wait, sir.
Yeah.
KAUS
TU.
TU. Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
TUBH.
Yeah.
SAM.
Yeah.
SARE.
Yeah.
@yahoo.com.
Yahoo. Dot.
Yahoo.com.
Com. Okay.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay. So, thank you, Sansari sir, for accepting my request. And it has been a wonderful time with you while sharing the experiences. And previous to this presentation, also, we had a very nice time. So, I would request you, sir, to kindly join us for with some another topic of
Yes.
relevance.
I would love to.
Yes, sir. So thanks to all the participants for enthusiastically, and I am happy to say that in our first session we had the complete room filled up. Like one room is like a maximum 100 participants. So, and there were I think 2-3 participants waiting in the lobby. So that was in the first session, and unfortunately the session got interrupted in between. And at least then also we had at least around 77 participants joining us back. So I think, sir, that is a great morale boosting and motivation for us to conduct future presentations. And in continuation of that, I would like to remind and intimate dear friends that in the coming Sunday, that is on 12th July at 3 p.m., we will be organizing another web lecture on mental wellness amongst dental professionals during and after COVID-19. Please note down the time, and if you want to take a screenshot, I will be circulating the information, but please, I know it's in afternoon time after the lunch. It's very difficult to keep oneself awake, and that too also on Sunday. But there was certain limitations of time and availability of the presenter. So we'll be having at 4 p.m. there is a webinar, so that's why it has been kept at 3 p.m. So we'll finish off around 4 p.m. before the DCI webcast starts. So the time has been scheduled accordingly to keeping in view of the DCI webcast. So I request all of you to kindly rejoin us on Sunday. So till then, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you all. Thank you, Sansari sir.
Thank you.